The first time I learned what happens to an Amish widow, I was eating cold leftover pasta in my apartment, and I had to put the fork down because the whole time I was reading, all I could think about was my grandmother. When my grandfather died, she was alone in a 2-bedroom condo with a microwave and one of those big plastic pill organizers with the days of the week on it. She lived another 11 years that way. An Amish widow in Lancaster County would never have been left like that. Not for 11 years, not for 11 days. But what actually happens to her? The black dress, the bishop, the letters, the 1-year wait, the strange 3-to-1 remarriage math is stranger and stricter and in some ways heavier than I expected. So I want to walk you through it. And then I want to tell you one story at the end that finally made me stop thinking about it at 2 in the morning. Start with the moment. An Amish man dies on his farm in Lancaster County, or Holmes County, Ohio, or somewhere in the Elkhart-LaGrange settlement in Indiana. He has a wife, 4 or 5 or 7 children, a barn full of cows that still need milking, and no life insurance policy. What happens next is not grief, not yet. What happens next is logistics. Within hours, word spreads through the phone shanties and the Amish newspaper networks. Neighbors show up to do his chores. The church bench wagon, the cook wagon, and the cooler wagon roll into the yard because the funeral will be held at the house, and the house is about to host 500 people. 2 of the women from the church take charge of meal planning. Somebody sets out slips of paper in a jar. Visitors arriving to pay condolences pull a slip on the way in. Yours says coleslaw. Yours says bread. Yours says pepper cabbage. This is not a casserole brigade. This is a logistical deployment. And it happens so fast that the widow, according to multiple Amish writers describing their own communities, barely has time to understand that her husband is gone before her kitchen fills with women who already know where her mixing bowls are. Now, the widow. At some point in the first 24 hours, she changes clothes. She puts on a plain black cape dress, the same cut she always wears, just sewn from black fabric. She ties on a black apron. Most old order women keep their usual white prayer cap. In the more conservative Swartzentruber and Nebraska Amish communities, where the cap is black every day anyway, nothing on her head changes, but her whole dress goes darker. She will wear some version of this for about a year. That about is doing a lot of work. There's no printed custom that says 12 months exactly. Custom scales mourning dress to the closeness of the relationship. A spouse, a parent, or a child gets roughly a year. A sibling around 6 months. A grandparent 3 to 6 months. A cousin maybe 6 weeks. It is a public signal. It tells the whole community. Every time she walks into a Sunday service or a singing or the grocery store in Intercourse or Berlin, that she is still inside the mourning year. Nobody will ask if she's ready to start courting again. They can see the answer. Now here's what surprised me. The widower wears nothing. No band, no armband, no dark hat band, nothing. He keeps his black Sunday suit for the funeral, and the next day he goes back to his normal white shirt, black broadfall trousers, and straw or felt hat, depending on the season. He keeps his beard, which has marked him as a married man since his wedding day, because the beard does not come off. His wife is dead, but his body is still legally, visibly, sartorially married to her, and every Amish man around him looks exactly the same. So when you drive past an Amish church service and you see the rows of women on one side of the shop or barn, all in their black Sunday dresses with their white caps, you cannot tell which one of them is the new widow unless you know. She blends in. The men are even more unreadable. Nothing about an Amish widower's clothes says he just buried his wife. His grief is real, and the community knows about it, because everybody in that district knows everything about everybody. But it is not written on his body, it is written on her body. Feel that for a second, because we are going to come back to it. Okay, the funeral. If you are imagining something solemn and old-fashioned, you are half right. The other half is that an Amish funeral is an enormous 3-day event that functions more like a communal operating system than a ceremony. Day 1. The body is taken to a cooperating English-run funeral home for embalming. Yes, embalming. This is one of the biggest misconceptions about Amish burial. Only the strictest groups, Swartzentruber and Nebraska Amish, typically avoid it. Mainstream Old Order Amish have used licensed funeral homes for more than a century. The body comes back without cosmetics, without styling, without a suit and tie. Day 1 or 2, the body arrives back at the house in a plain 6-sided pine or poplar coffin, handmade by a local Amish craftsman. The furniture in the front room gets moved out. Neighbors file past for 2 days of quiet home viewing. An Amish woman, if she is the deceased, is often buried in the white cape and apron she wore at her wedding. Day 3, the funeral itself. 90 minutes to 2.5 hours in Pennsylvania Dutch, held in a shop or barn big enough to seat 400 or 500 people on wooden benches. 2 ministers preach. There are no flowers, no musical instruments, no eulogy. Hymns from the Ausbund are not sung, they are read aloud. Then, 4 pallbearers, handpicked from married friends if the deceased was married, carry the coffin out to a horse-drawn hearse wagon. Everybody who owns a buggy in that district follows to the cemetery. At the grave, the bishop reads another hymn. The pallbearers lower the coffin on ropes. Then they hand-shovel the dirt back in. All of them. Every man takes a turn with the shovel. And then everybody goes back to the house for a meal. Mashed potatoes and gravy, cold sliced ham or beef, coleslaw, pepper cabbage, cheese cubes, homemade bread, and funeral pie, which is raisin pie, and the reason it's raisin is that raisins keep forever and the pie travels well, and somebody thought about this 100 years ago and solved it. The widow is at the meal. She is sitting in her new black dress, and around her, the community is already quietly planning how she is going to survive the next 10 years without him. Which brings me to the part everyone gets wrong, the 1-year waiting period. You have probably read or heard that Amish widows have to wait exactly 1 year before they can remarry. Technically, that's not a rule. There is nothing in the Dordrecht Confession of 1632, which is the foundational Anabaptist statement of faith for the Amish, that sets a specific waiting period. There is nothing in most published ordnungs, which are the unwritten/semi-written community rulebooks, that gives a number. What exists is a very strong custom, enforced socially, not ecclesiastically, that a widow wears her mourning black for roughly a year and does not court publicly during that time. A bishop might quietly counsel a widow who started seeing someone in month 4. Nobody is going to shun her for it. Shunning, the full ban, is reserved for remarriage after divorce, not remarriage after bereavement. Paul's letters in Romans 7 and 1 Corinthians 7 explicitly free the surviving spouse to remarry, and the Amish take that seriously. Here is the exception that breaks the year: a widower with small children. 2 Amish sociologists, Denise Reiling and Gail LeVecchia, distinguish between 2 kinds of Amish remarriages. They call the first a companion marriage, where 2 older widowed people in their 50s or 60s pair up and essentially keep each other company for the rest of their lives. And they call the second a family formation marriage, where a widower in his 30s with 4 young children marries a still fertile woman, often quite quickly, because those children need a mother and the farm needs a household manager, and nobody in the community thinks waiting 12 months serves anyone. So the rule is a year, except when it isn't, which for young men is often. Now, let's talk about the thing that will bother some of you. Amish widowers remarry a lot more than Amish widows do. A 2014 study published in BMJ Open by Agarwala, Siefter, and colleagues analyzed 10,892 Amish couples from Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana, using husband birth years from 1850 through 1900. Their numbers: 1,290 widowed husbands remarried, 378 widowed wives remarried. That's a ratio of roughly 3.4 to 1. For every Amish widow who found a new spouse, 3.5 Amish widowers did. Why the gap? 3 reasons, stacked. First, childcare pressure, which pushes widowers toward rapid remarriage. Second, the economic reality of a plain farm household, which requires a female producer to run the canning, the gardening, the laundry, the dairy kitchen. A widowed man cannot run that operation alone for long. Third, and this one nobody likes to say out loud, there is a documented surplus of unmarried Amish women in most communities, which sociologist Da-Chang Kong described in a 1998 paper simply called Single Women in Amish Society. When a 35-year-old widower goes looking, he has options. When a 35-year-old widow goes looking, she is competing for a smaller pool. If you're finding this helpful so far, hit subscribe. I cover slow documentary breakdowns like this one on a regular basis, and the next one is about how Amish weddings actually work, which, spoiler, is even weirder than you think. Okay, back to it. How does the remarriage itself happen if there's no dating app and the widow can't exactly show up at the youth singings? Largely by mail. Widowed adults don't go to the Sunday evening singings where teenagers and 20-somethings court. Instead, they use family networks. An older sister introduces you to a widowed cousin 2 districts over. A bishop's wife mentions, casually, that Amos in Indiana just lost his Anna. The Amish written scribe papers, publications like The Diary of Sugar Creek, Ohio, and Die Botschaft of Lancaster, print columns of community news that include deaths, engagements, and weddings. People read them like rural match notices. And then, the letters. The Amish sociologists Charles Hurst and David McConnell put it beautifully in their book, An Amish Paradox. They describe Amish widow courtship as typically quite private, sometimes happening by mail, with the couple not even seeing each other during the period of courtship, which, as Hurst and McConnell joke, puts the Amish at the cutting edge of male dating. So picture this. A widowed farmer in Indiana writes a letter by lamplight at a kitchen table to a widow he has never met in Pennsylvania. She writes back. They write for weeks, months sometimes. A relative brokers a first visit. If the visit goes well, another one follows. Then, quietly, the bishop is told, and a small, quiet second wedding is arranged, usually at the widow's home, usually with 30 to 100 guests, no wedding blue dress, no new hawker attendants, no elaborate Eck corner table feast. Just a meal, a short service, and 2 people who have each buried somebody starting again. There is no Amish matchmaker in the formal sense. There is no bishop arranging matches. Popular television shows like the stage Discovery series Amish Mafia have given people the idea that Amish leadership controls marriages. Donald Craybill, the most respected academic observer of Amish life, has been unambiguous about this, telling Lancaster Online that those shows are, quote, trash TV. The bishop approves and officiates. He does not assign. Now, the children. Say a 30-year-old widow with 2 toddlers marries a 35-year-old widower with 3 children of her own. Instantly, she is the mother of 5. What do they call her? This is where the research thins out. There is no peer-reviewed ethnography of Amish step-parent naming conventions. What exists, from memoirs and from advice columns in Amish publications like Family Life, is a loose pattern. Very young stepchildren, say under 6, often adopt the Pennsylvania Dutch word ma'am or mem for the new stepmother within a few months. Older children sometimes keep the memory of their birth mother in the word and call the stepmother by her first name instead. Nobody legislates it, families figure it out. Inheritance is more formal. Amish families are embedded in American civil law, which means wills, probate, and real property rules apply. Farmland tends to pass to sons, and in many communities specifically to the youngest son, a pattern economists have called ultimogeniture. Daughters get movable property, cash, or smaller parcels. Stepchildren have no automatic inheritance right under most state intestate statutes, so Amish families typically write wills, and in family formation remarriages, those wills tend to equalize treatment between biological and stepchildren. And the grandparents stay. They do not drift out. They often live in the Daadi Haus, which is the next thing I want you to understand. If you have ever wondered where an Amish widow actually sleeps at night, 10 years after her husband is gone, this is your answer. The Daadi Haus, also spelled Daadi House or Gross Daadi House, depending on dialect, is a small dwelling attached to or built next to the main Amish farmhouse. It usually has a sitting room, a bedroom or 2, and a small kitchen. When the oldest son and his wife take over the farm, the parents move out of the big house and into the Daadi Haus. When one parent dies, the surviving widow or widower stays there, surrounded by grandchildren, walked to church by adult children, fed daily, watched over. There is no such thing as an Amish nursing home in most communities. There is the Daadi Haus. This is what my grandmother did not have. My grandmother had a condo, and a microwave, and a pill organizer, and a daughter who called her on Tuesdays. An Amish widow in Lancaster County, who ends up in a Daadi House attached to her youngest son's dairy farm, might see 18 people on a random Wednesday afternoon, great-grandchildren running through the kitchen, a daughter-in-law stopping in with pie, a neighbor walking over with a quilting question. It is not that Amish widows are never lonely. It is that the architecture of their loneliness is completely different from ours. Now, the money. Because money is where the system gets most misunderstood. The Amish are exempt from Social Security under a 1965 law codified as Internal Revenue Code Section 1402G. To qualify, you file IRS Form 4029, and the exemption is both a tax waiver and a benefits waiver. Amish self-employed farmers and business owners pay no Social Security tax and collect no Social Security or Medicare benefits. Period. That means an Amish widow of a self-employed Amish farmer gets $0 a month in survivor benefits from the federal government. So, what does she live on? Family labor, first. Her son's farm feeds her. Her daughter-in-law shares eggs and bread. Second, church alms. Every Amish congregation has a deacon who administers a fund, contributed to voluntarily, that supports widows and anyone in need. Third, 2 formal mutual aid organizations, the Amish Aid Plan, an IRS-registered entity founded in the 1950s for fire and natural disaster losses, and Amish Hospital Aid, founded in 1969 in Lancaster to cover major medical bills. Fourth, her own work. Widows quilt for market, grow produce for roadside stands in Lancaster County, bake pies for farmers markets like Reading Terminal and Green Dragon, and clean English homes. The Amish scholar Karen Johnson Weiner, in her 2020 book The Lives of Amish Women, describes widows running greenhouses and cleaning businesses as one of the few categories of Amish woman where significant economic independence is both practical and socially encouraged. Put those 4 layers together, and you have a financial safety net that is entirely communal and almost entirely cashless. Nobody writes her a check that says widow benefit. The community simply absorbs the cost of her existence, the way it absorbs everything else. Now the theology, because without this, the rest of it doesn't quite make sense. The central concept in Amish spiritual life is a German word with no clean English translation, Gelassenheit. Donald Kraybill, in his foundational book, The Riddle of Amish Culture, defines it as self-surrender, submission, yielding to the will of God and to others, contentment, and a calm spirit. Gelassenheit is the opposite of the American cultural impulse to fight, to demand, to process, to heal on your own schedule. When an Amish widow's husband dies, Gelassenheit tells her that his death is not an injustice to rage against. It is a thing that God has allowed. Her correct response is not protest, it is yielding. This does not mean, I want to be careful here, that Amish widows do not grieve. They do. Saloma Miller Furlong, who left the Amish and wrote memoirs about it, describes her mother's and her own mourning in detail. Lovina Eicher, who writes the syndicated Lovina's Amish Kitchen column, has described grief in her own extended family in unmistakable terms. The Amish scholar David Weaver Zerker, in the book Amish Grace about the Nickel Mines schoolhouse shooting of 2006, writes that forgiveness and grief in that community was, quote, absorbing the pain, extending empathy to the offender, and purging bitterness. Grief is work. It is just work that happens inside a community that is there for it. And I think that's the word. Inside. Which brings me to Susan Bontrager. On December 9, 2020, a 30-year-old Amish man named Mose Bontrager was being driven to his job at an RV factory in northern Indiana by his friend and co-worker Dan. Another vehicle crossed the center line. Dan was killed instantly. Mose was taken to the hospital with head injuries, internal damage, broken bones. He never regained consciousness. He died 5 days later on December 14th. Mose left behind his wife Susan, 24 years old, and their 2 children, a daughter named Jenny, who was almost 3, and a son Ryan, who was 17 months. Susan is Lovina Eicher's daughter, which means her story is unusually well documented through her mother's syndicated column. Within hours of Mose's death, church friends and family arrived at the Eichers' farm to help prepare the pole barn for the funeral viewing. The church bench wagon, the cook wagon, and the cooler wagon were delivered. 2 church women took charge of meal planning. Slips of paper with food assignments went into a jar on the table by the door. Viewing was held December 16th and 17th, 2020. Funeral and burial were December 18th. Susan wrote 3 months later in a piece printed in her mother's column. Jennifer still comes up to me and asks me if I think Daddy is coming back. Ryan can't talk except for some baby talk. so he tries to repeat after Jennifer. It breaks my heart that their daddy isn't here to hug them or be with them any longer. At 10 months, Susan's unmarried sister Verna moved in to help with the kids. At 1 year, Susan wrote, "I think the hardest part of the day is when we all sit down at the set table and my beloved Mose isn't there beside me." On December 30th, 2022, 2 years and 2 weeks after Mose's death, Susan married a man named Irvin, who had lost his own first wife Sarah to breast cancer 3 months before the accident that killed Mose. Irvin brought 3 children into the marriage. Susan and Irvin now have 7 children between them, biological and step. In a December 2025 column, Lavina wrote about the blended family this way: "Irvin and Sarah's 3 children, Caitlin, Isaiah, and Curtis, have won our hearts, and I never think of them as step-grandchildren. That is what the system, at its best, actually produces. Not a rushed widow, not a pressured widow. A woman who was 24, who grieved publicly in her mother's newspaper column for 2 years, who was surrounded by family and church and food and paperwork and chores, and who ultimately married another widowed parent whose loss mirrored hers. No app, no therapist, no antidepressant prescription, just a community that was there, a theology that said this is allowed, and a husband's black Sunday suit still hanging somewhere in a closet in southern Michigan." Okay, back to my grandmother. After my grandfather died, she kept wearing her regular clothes because no one in a condo complex in our part of the world wears mourning. She kept her condo because that's what her children thought she wanted. She went to grief support for a while, and then she stopped going. She lived 11 more years and mostly watched television, and my mother says she was never really the same. I am not romanticizing Amish widowhood. It is hard. It is gendered. It is socially claustrophobic in ways that would break a lot of us. Widows lose autonomy. They lose control over where they sleep. They can't go to a movie alone on a Tuesday because there is no movie, no alone, and no Tuesday in the sense we mean it. But when I think about my grandmother in that condo, eating dinner at the kitchen counter with the television on, and I think about Susan Bontrager in southern Michigan at 24, standing in a pole barn full of neighbors, on the day she buried her husband, I can't honestly tell you that we got the better deal. We got something. We got a life you can customize, a career you can chase, a grief you can process on your own timeline. We just didn't get the pole barn. If this was the kind of slow documentary you actually wanted, hit subscribe. And the next one I'm working on is about what happens to an Amish woman who never marries at all, which, it turns out, is a much stranger story than I was expecting. Thanks for watching.